Hi, and welcome to the show. Well, today there's an important person in the room, and it's not me. It's Ossie Bladine, the editor of the News Register. Thanks so much for being here, Ossie.
Almost as important. Thanks for having me, Ken. Appreciate it.
Well, I've got a lot to learn about newspaper and publishing, and specifically the News Register, and a little bit to learn about you. I think people are probably curious. They know where you grew up. It's not like you're new to town.
Right.
But maybe what were you like in high school? What was your thing?
I was, I don't know, a little nerdy, a little popular, a little this, a little that. I tried to, mix and mingle with as many of the cliques as possible.
Now here you're the newspaper, the newspaper, the heir apparent, I guess, of newspaper. Did you look at writing, journalism? Was that something, by golly, you knew you were going to be? Some kids know they're going to be an astronaut. You knew you were going to be a newspaper guy,
Yeah,
or not so much.
I mean, I grew up surrounded by it, and I knew obviously that was always an option for me, and so I was around the newsroom. I worked in high school in the newsroom a little bit, worked on the student newspaper, and so there was always an interest and a depth of knowledge that I received early on just by being around it day by day and talking about it at home. And so I was never, growing up as a teenager, I wasn't like, by God, I'm going to, go to college and come back and take over this newspaper. But I'm not surprised that I'm back here doing that.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's always the possibility that some kids, no, I've seen enough of that
yeah.
in my
Yeah,
family.
yeah.
We could have lost you off to who knows where.
There's a lot of, there's a lot of old newspaper families that's happened to.
Yeah. So you went to school and maybe not journalism.
Yeah, I went to U of O and I worked on the school newspaper there, but I studied political science and got into that, which has really helped actually to be able to spend hours going through legal documents and court cases and things like that, and understanding the politics side of things and being able to bring that into the journalistic realm has definitely helped.
All right. So was there you didn't come here straight out of school, then back to the News Register? What
No, I
happened
spent
there?
a few years after college. I moved to Vancouver, Washington. We bought a little start-up alternative paper, kind of like the Willamette Week. It was called the Vancouver Voice, and ran that for a few years. Covered local government and lots of arts and culture and things like that. It was a struggle. It was right there as the Great Recession was hitting, and marketing budgets were pretty skimpy around then. And it's unfortunate. I go back to Vancouver now, and I don't know if you've been there lately, but it's booming. And I just look, man, if we were doing an alternative paper right now, it'd be really successful in downtown Vancouver.
So timing mattered.
Timing definitely mattered for that one, yeah.
Well, then why was it time to come back here for you and maybe the paper? What was going on?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it kind of seemed the natural next step. I'd got to that point to where, if I felt like I really was going to branch off and do something else, I would have. And but I didn't feel the need, and taken the lessons that I learned at the Vancouver Voice and to return home, and there's, spots to be filled in there. And so it was just a natural progression to come back.
And now you're the editor. Tell me what that means. You're responsible for every word, or is that somebody else?
No, basically, yeah. I mean, editor's responsible for every word, whether that editor knows that it went or not.
Okay.
The buck stops there. If there's an error in the paper and you didn't do it, it's still on you. But it's overall direction of where the news reporting is going. And then also the standard editing and the editorials, and being head of the editorial board, and being a representative out there into the different organizations around town, being that point person when somebody wants to call and either praise you or gripe against you. You're the one that's there to have that conversation with people, and that's, even though it can be frustrating sometimes. It's nice it's always great engaging with people. I mean, you'll receive an email or a voicemail from somebody who's, very ticked off by something that's in the paper. But then you call, and I've had a lot of really good conversations that started like that and ended up being, friendly. And I'm able to teach that person more about the process that we go through and how the news gathering and reporting works. And then it's, all feedback is good feedback also.
Well, as editor, you mentioned a phrase that said which way the direction of the news is going. Give us a snapshot of kind of right now. what's under that umbrella? Where is the news going right now? What are you interested in? What do you want to follow? What are your question marks? What do you see opening up?
Yeah, and well, we're actually about to release a reader survey to learn more. It's hard to gauge. I mean, we get, feedback in bits and pieces, and, we know that we can't please everybody because everybody wants something different. We're constantly told that we have too much negative news, and we're constantly told that we have too much whitewashy positive news, and we have too much crime, and then we have too much school things, and then why are we focusing so much time on going to local government meetings, and why aren't we? And so that's definitely a big challenge of the newspaper. What is it that that we do cover, and how much? And it's all a balancing game that's kind of in constant motion like that. We know that we want to do more kind of investigative stories. We call them enterprise stories. And as I just mentioned, we just hired a managing editor in this last month, and so that will provide some extra manpower before that. Well, woman power. Her name's Jody DeYoung, and she comes with a great background and a lot of experience in that. And so I think she'll help the newsroom kind of focus on some more of those bigger projects that can be a struggle in a small newsroom because, the reporters are just trying to get enough content to fill 2 papers a week. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes the news makes itself, but other times we really got to go out and search for some stories. So, but we'll have some added organizational skills and some added oversight with the new managing editor with Jody in there, and be able to present some of those more deeper stories that I think people really appreciate.
Yeah, investigative reporting can take weeks, months.
It is, and back in the glory days, I mean, we'd have a reporter that spent a month on one story, and that's just not really feasible in today's world with newspapers.
Well, let's talk about the glory days. Was that while you were there, or did that precede you?
That preceded me. I mean, I was there in high school around, we had, and it was, I returned in about 2012, so just as things were kind of slowly dipping down. And, we've cut back the news staff probably about in half over the last 10 years or so. And yeah, again, it's, I think that kind of longer piece investigative stuff is what has been missing because of that. So now it's just trying to figure out how we, return to that with a limited staff.
What kind of things have you been trying the last few years? As this, print journalism has this concern around it, and you're addressing that how?
Right. Well, partly by just continuing to do what we do. It's a lot of newspapers feel the urge that they need to, okay, what's the next steps that we have to take with technology and getting everybody digitally and, doing social media, this and that. And those are all good things that you can do to help brand and to help get information out there. But at the same time, readers subscribe to us and have been over the decades for kind of a similar reason, and that's to know what's going on locally in local news. And we're, not necessarily the only source for local news, but we're the only people who are, 24/7 talking about what's going on in the schools, going to the city government, sitting through, every 3-hour, planning commission meeting, which people do when it's, when they have some skin in the game, but otherwise, maybe not necessarily paying attention to those things. So, part of it is kind of sticking to that core of what we do and keep promoting local. And it's, people always say, they say, oh, the internet, has been killing newspapers. And it's really kind of more of the internet's, it's the people and their attention, and the internet as a medium, not necessarily, but how it draws people's attention away from what's going on around them has been a hurdle for a lot of newspapers. I think we're really lucky that we live where we are in McMinnville, that we have so many civically engaged people and residents around us. And we have a strong base of people that still want the local news. And so that definitely gives us optimism going forward.
You talked about your digital presence, and you do have digital subscriptions. Give us an idea, what kind of percentage of people are digital only?
Yeah, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I would estimate maybe around 10%, not a ton.
Not a ton, yeah.
And we have about half of our subscribers will have an online account and get the print. And then, so, leaves around maybe 40% that just get the print product still.
Well, I think people are probably maybe a little bit surprised at that. That hasn't really moved to digital only like so many things have.
And we have a fairly active website. We actually we were the first newspaper in Oregon with a website back in the day. And so we were, on the forefront of that back in the day. And, but yeah, it's the print product is still the bread and butter. And from the financial side, you can't really go digital only. You can't just have a local news website on the scale that we have. I mean, you'd have to cut back to a reporter or two and be real minuscule. But maybe in a bigger market where you can, have a much broader and bigger base of advertisers digitally to fund a big news room, that works. But on the local level, we haven't seen many examples where a newspaper has gone to digital only and been successful.
So that's not the future for you.
And people don't, you can't you can get the crosswords online, but they're not as fun. And you can get comics online, and it's still scattered. I mean, I think people like to have a single product that has everything there that you can kind of peruse and pick and choose what you want without having pop-up ads at you and whatever other things the internet
There are no
throws at you
pop-up ads in the
constantly.
newspaper. That's a very good
Not
point.
yet, although we might try to figure out how to do that.
Don't, no. Well, you mentioned, advertising. How has that changed? How have you, and how's the News Register responded?
Yeah, so over the last decade or 15 years, we've started doing a lot more specialty publications, and those are things like we have a quarterly Roots to Roofs, which is home and garden. We have Indulge, which is food and drink oriented for the county, and a visitor guide. And we do a lot of especially like profile ones, like Women of the Yamhill Valley and Young Professionals of the Yamhill Valley.
Those are all once a year?
Those are a lot of those are once a year. Roots and Indulge is 4 times a year. So we have kind of a mix, and those really responded to again as the Great Recession was going down and marketing budgets dropped, and people didn't have business owners didn't quite have the marketing means to run in the newspaper constantly, and so they would just cut it out altogether. And so, our response was to create these specialty publications that would get them in and, have a theme so that, okay, your
demographic.
You're a restaurant.
Yeah.
We have a food and drink magazine. You are a contractor, so we have a construction and home and garden that you fit into that theme. It's been good, but it's also a challenge of how do we get them back, because that's a good part of a marketing strategy, I think, but they're not frequent enough. And, I think the best marketing and the best advertising is being in the newspaper and having a constant presence in there. And so it's just a challenge to get some of the advertisers to, think that way and to come back to, it's important to be in front of people at all times, not just, okay, I'm in these few publications, and that's kind of easy for me to do too. It's easier for them to handle, and they don't have to think every couple weeks what they want for their ads. And so, but we're working on different ways to increase the advertising in the newspaper.
Some of the ads that run in your paper, who do you think is getting a really good bang for their buck? What's a great thing to be advertising in the ROP, you call it, run of the paper?
Yeah.
Maybe you want to talk to the people that are watching and say that this is the kind of thing that really works in a newspaper. You want to invite some people to think about?
Yeah. There's a couple things. I mean, obviously when there's, when you're having a big event or a big anniversary that you want to celebrate, you get in the paper and you'll get 7,000 sets of eyes on it. And so when it's those kind of, one-time things, that's a good good one. But also, any business that has a product that a lot of people are going to eventually need. Maybe they'll need it right now, and maybe they'll need it tomorrow or next week. And so, they'll run a few ads, and you look at them and you don't even think about it, but it makes
Shoes, for example.
But it makes an impression on you. And each time you see that ad, it makes an impression on you. So that 5 months down there, when your sole breaks and you need somebody to fix your shoe, you know exactly where to go because it's been put in your head.
They're in the
It's been
paper,
put in
right?
your head. That's right. And that's where that, and as our, it's tough because we're not necessarily marketing experts. I wish we were, and I would love to have somebody on staff that was an expert that would teach people. We can kind of tell them what works best, how we know it, but still to teach them what we say how important it is, but we're just trying to sell them something. The problem is that it's tough to market, and it's hard to know exactly how your ad dollars are spent, what your return on investment is, and all that. And that's why it's a lot easier for some businesses to just say, I don't want to deal with that. That's a little over my head. I'm unsure. That's money being spent. But you have to advertise. You have to get out there.
Yeah.
And so that's something now that as I mentioned, I'm moving more into the sales and marketing. And so I'm hoping to get out there around more businesses and more owners and marketers and work with them and kind of look long term, not just trying to sell them on this ad here and there, but create your long term marketing budget for the year. Let's create a plan that keeps a consistent presence for the target market that you have.
Yeah. So that's going forward. Great. Let's go backwards.
Yeah.
Where did this all begin?
By the way, and I know it's odd pitching sales and advertising as the name editors up here. That can kind of be really
What's working?
The mix of editorial and advertising is always it takes a steady balance. And in the office, there's that wall between editorial and news gathering.
Okay.
Because you can't mix those. You can't sell an ad and have that advertiser say, oh, I'll buy an ad, but I really want a story.
Yeah.
So once you do that, then you devalue that yourself to the reader. So anyways, but it's an interesting position that I'm in, but I feel like just my background has kind of allows me to do that because I know the rules. It's kind of those, you can't break the rules until you know them.
Yeah.
And so not that I'm breaking the rules, but anyway, yeah. So going back, about the history of the paper, or
Yeah. This was 1800s, right?
1860. Our lineage goes back to 1866, and that was the Lafayette Courier. So that was the first newspaper in Yamhill County. And there
that was a Bladine?
No, not
okay.
quite that far back. So then there was decades of. There was a lot of newspapers back in the day.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you go through the history of newspapers in Yamhill County, and there's dozens upon dozens of them.
Really?
So eventually, the Courier changed names, moved to McMinnville, and became the Telephone Register eventually. In the early 1900s, the main two, there were still a couple of small ones in and out, but the main two were the Telephone Register and the News Reporter.
So they were fighting it out.
They were going out,
for
yeah.
the news, huh?
And I know it's amazing to think, today it's, one newspaper doing everything it can to survive. And back in the day, they had 2, 3, maybe 4 at a time that were in town.
Yeah.
And so my great-grandpa Lars, he owned a newspaper in Iowa. He came over to the area for the World's Fair when it was in Portland and happened upon McMinnville and don't know the whole story of why, but decided he wanted to buy the Telephone Register. And so he did. He sent his eldest son, Jack, out to start running it. And Lars eventually came and joined him. And then Jack's brother, Phil, came. Lars passed, and Phil and Jack ran it for years. Jack died pretty young, actually, in the 50s or so. And so Phil ran it as publisher and for a couple decades, and eventually his son, Jeb, took it over. And that's my dad. And so here I am. My dad's still working, way more than he should be at his age, but that's it's a labor of love for him, and that's what he wants to do. So he's a very active as publisher still, and I'm kind of titles. I'm collecting titles these days, but acting as associate editor or associate publisher and editor. So
Okay.
slowly taking things off of his plate as I can while other things pile up.
Do you have any more potential editors at home?
Maybe we'll see. I don't know between the two which one's more likely now, but yeah, I got a 2-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy, and so I bring them around the office. They don't. They show more interest on what's on the computer than what's going on around the newsroom. But yeah, we'll see. On the interesting. Hopefully there's a business for him to take over down the line.
Any brothers or sisters?
I have one sister.
Okay.
Yep, Chelsea. Chelsea Nickel, and she worked at our print plant for several years. Decided to go off and do her own thing a little bit. Took one of our old print presses from the early 1900s, refurbished it to start doing letterpress. And so she started a letterpress company, and then she started doing some shirts and other clothing for McMinnville. If you see any of those, the McMinnville shirts or hats around town, she's the one that makes those. And then she's gotten into the event space business. And so she and her husband renovated our back warehouse of the News Register, and that's the bindery.
Right. Okay.
And that was actually the bindery back in the day. And so we built our print plant in the mid-'90s out in the industrial area. But before that, our press was downtown. So where our parking lot is now, that's where the press was. And then the event space, that was the bindery. So hence the name, the bindery for it.
All right. So still very close to home as far as the
Definitely.
newspaper business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of you. Well, give us an overview of, I know there's an association with Oregon Lithoprint, but I'm not clear
Yeah.
how you're connected.
So Oregon Lithoprint, it's basically just the umbrella corporation, and so it's all one company. So that is, it's more known as our commercial printing side, and so out there in the industrial park we have our print press where we do the newspaper, but we also do jobs from around the region and the country. So it's all cold web, so we only do the newsprint. We don't do glossy printing. But we contract off. So a lot of our publications have a glossy cover, so we'll contract those, bring them in, and then combine them with what we print. But we do catalogs, school catalogs, other newspapers, other magazines. We do things like the Catholic Press, and we'll do comic books, anything that you can kind of print on newsprint, we can do.
Okay.
And so, so Oregon Lithoprint's kind of our corporate name, but more known as our commercial printing side.
So if you want to do commercial printing, would you just walk in the door out there, or would you come to the office here in town?
Yeah, you can just walk out the door there, or always better to kind of call. We don't have a receptionist out there, but yeah, best to call, or you can go on the website and kind of get a better idea of the examples we have, and then send an email and, with whatever job you're thinking. And if we can't do it, we'd be happy to help. We have some customers that they don't even print with us, but we just they use us as a customer service, and we'll get their jobs done for them using other presses.
Well, you've had such a, for not being a guy that decided he was going to stay in the newspaper business, you were in the college newspaper. You did go into a newspaper up in Vancouver. So by the time you got here, you kind of knew the game. But I'm just wondering if there was something that surprised you, or what have you learned since and how long have you been now editor, or been here?
So I moved back. It's been about 9 years.
Okay.
That I've been back, and
So
started out doing digital media, and then became news editor, and then editor, and again taking on other hats.
So what are the big lessons?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one, off of a discussion we were just talking about in editorial earlier, is when you're writing things, be cognizant of how it's going to be read by other people. A lot of times we'll write something, thinking that it's obvious what we mean, or what this is supposed to be. But everybody says, oh, journalists are biased, this news, you're biased. But people read with their own biases.
It goes both ways.
It goes both ways. Everybody has completely their own bias. I mean, we have, again, we're, depending upon who you talk to around town, we're either just another cog of the liberal press, or we're way too conservative for this area, for what they would like.
Yeah.
And so it's, there's always, the bias is a funny game. I mean, everybody has their own personal biases, and I don't think any journalist that says they're 100% non-biased is lying a little bit. But, we have our own kind of journalistic ethics and rules to go by to make sure that's tampered down as much as possible. What are some other lessons? I don't know. It's just looking back, it's just kind of been a whirlwind of items. Get back to people. Call them back. If they send you a scathing letter or leave a really angry voicemail, don't just brush it off of somebody off their rocker. I mean, call them back, because I've had a lot of great conversations that started with an angry email or an angry voicemail.
Yeah, well, I think that attests to the fact that you're a good listener, which I guess is what a reporter should be also. And you're taking home you're taking home something from that interview.
Right.
You're taking it to heart, and people probably sense that.
Yeah, and always, as much as possible. I mean, kindly put it in. If they're wrong, kindly tell them that you think they're wrong, and here's why. And a lot of times it's, people read the newspaper, but don't necessarily know the ins and outs of how reporting works and why we do what we do. And we get it too. Anytime, often we deal with really difficult stories and difficult things and things. We're taking things that shatters people's lives, and we're putting it out on a public scale, and so.
And to get that right, that's a lot of responsibility in those kinds of stories. To, like you say, print something in a way that it communicates what you're trying to communicate and can't be misread.
Yeah, and that's another important lesson, to just, realize that other people's lives and what they're living and how they perceive it's not that that you're right or they're wrong or whatnot, but it's just kind of the best to communicate each side as you can, and to have your kind of why you do things and be able to explain that. As long as you can explain why you did what you did, they may not like it, and a lot of times they won't, but at least they can understand it a little bit better. And that's what we do. A lot of times with some of the crime stories and things like that. Things that are public record, but people don't like when it goes in the newspaper. It's weird. People will blast things on Facebook all they want, but as soon as it goes in print, then they're really mad about it, or then it takes on some different meaning when it's printed in the newspaper as opposed to just being at Facebook.
Well, that meaning is responsibility.
Yeah.
And that probably weighs on you and all of your staff.
Right.
That it needs to be right. It needs to come out on Tuesday and
That's right. Yep.
Tuesday and Friday.
That's the other
and
thing.
It's got to look good
we
too.
We have a deadline, and
it's got to be pretty.
Sometimes, unfortunately, errors can happen just by the nature of the deadline, and maybe you didn't have enough time to call again and make sure on this one fact. But it gets one of the reasons for that extra meaning is because it's printed. It's very permanent, and it's then it's archived forever. And if we get something wrong, we'll run a correction in the next issue, but. We can't go, it's not like the website where we can go back to the last issue and erase it.
Yeah.
Like we can on web stories. We're, one of the important roles of a newspaper is that we're telling the story of right now. I mean, you look back at papers from 50, 60 years ago, that's the storytelling. That's what people will remember.
More responsibility.
A lot of responsibility. It is.
Well, Ossie, we're out of time.
Oh.
Thank you for taking that on. Thank you for showing up every day and making sure we have a good newspaper.
Hey, I appreciate it. And again, one of our ongoing things is local. Pay attention around you. So thank you for doing this show, because that goes a long ways.
My pleasure.
Mm-hmm.